Discovery in the ruins. Zephyr's last stand. The Galactic Empire's forces had ravaged the once thriving colony of Zephyr. Now its cities lay in ruins, and its people were either enslaved or scattered. In the midst of this desolation, Captain Gary Miller and his elite infiltration unit found themselves on a mission that could turn the tide of the war. The objective was simple: sabotage key targets to disrupt the Nasset's control over the colony. As they moved through the remains of an abandoned human base, Gary's keen eyes caught a glint of metal buried under debris. Curiosity piqued. He approached and began clearing the rubble. What he uncovered left him speechless. An ancient M1 A2C Abrams main battle tank, seemingly intact despite the passage of centuries. Ancestral echoes. Gary's fingers traced the contours of the tank, memories of his great-great-grandfather, Sergeant George Miller, flooding back. Family legend spoke of how George had used a similar tank to hold off an entire enemy armored division during Earth's Third World War. The thought that he might be standing before the very machine that had been part of his family's legacy filled him with a sense of destiny. With a sense of urgency, Gary popped the hatch and climbed inside. To his astonishment, the tank's systems flickered to life. The onboard AI, recognizing him as a descendant of its last commander, greeted him with a voice that had not spoken for centuries. First contact. The reunion was abruptly interrupted by the guttural sounds of Nasset soldiers. They were closing in on the hangar, their plasma rifles at the ready. Gary had no choice. He sealed the hatch and gripped the controls, his heart pounding. The AI's calm voice cut through his rising panic. "Captain Miller, I detect multiple hostile units on an intercept course. Shall I engage?" Gary's response was immediate. "Do it." The tank roared to life, and the ancient machine, now a relic of an old war, became humanity's last hope. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, but the tank's armor held firm. Gary swung the turret around, and with a thunderous boom, the cannon fired, shredding the Nasset soldiers into ribbons, turning the tide. Gary's squad, pinned down and outgunned, watched in awe as the Abrams tank tore through the enemy ranks. The once formidable Nasset forces were reduced to smoldering wreckage in mere minutes. The sight of the ancient machine in action reignited a spark of hope within them. "Sergeant Jackson," Gary called out, his voice filled with renewed determination. "We have a chance. Let's take it." Jackson and the others rallied around the tank, their spirits lifted by this unexpected turn of events. With the Abrams leading the charge, they advanced through the devastated base, the tank's firepower paving the way for their assault. The plan. As they regrouped, Gary shared his audacious plan. They would use the tank's reactive camouflage and advanced weaponry to skirt the edges of the Nasset perimeter, emerging behind the alien main command post. It was a mission fraught with peril, but with the Abrams at their disposal, they had a fighting chance. "Atlas," Gary addressed the AI. "Tell me more about these experimental weapons. I want to know everything this beast can do." The AI's voice was filled with a sense of purpose. "The Abrams is equipped with directed energy weapons, including a high-intensity laser for precision strikes and an electromagnetic pulse cannon for disabling enemy electronics. The main gun can fire a variety of advanced munitions, including depleted uranium rounds." Gary's eyes widened at the arsenal at his disposal. "Perfect. Let's make every shot count." With their strategy set, they moved out, the tank's holographic projection system disguising it as a Nasset vehicle. The disguise was flawless, allowing them to approach the enemy's command center undetected. The attack. At Gary's command, the hologram dropped, and the tank's true form was revealed. The Abrams unleashed its full might, targeting the shield generator protecting the facility. The concentrated beam of charged particles bored a molten hole through the generator, causing the force field to flicker and die. Pandemonium erupted among the Nasset forces as the Abrams continued its assault. Plasma cannons were reduced to slag, and defensive positions were obliterated. The command center's defenses crumbled under the relentless onslaught. Victory and reflection. With the enemy in disarray, Jackson's team planted breaching charges and stormed the facility. The Nasat were overwhelmed, their forces shattered by the combined might of the Abrams and the human resistance. As the dust settled, Gary surveyed the battlefield, the tank standing as a symbol of resilience and defiance. The discovery of the ancient Abrams had changed everything, giving humanity a glimmer of hope in its darkest hour. "Atlas," Gary said quietly, "we're going to win this war." The A's response was filled with unwavering resolve. "Yes, Captain. We will." Secrets of the past. Reconnecting with history. As the resistance fighters secured the command center, Gary took a moment to catch his breath. The battle had been fierce, but they had emerged victorious. The ancient Abrams tank had proven its worth, and now it was time to understand its full potential. "Atlas," Gary called out, "tell me more about this tank's history. Where did it come from? And what else is it capable of?" The A's holographic form flickered to life on the tank's control panel. The Abrams was part of Project Prometheus, a top-secret initiative to create a combat vehicle that could adapt and evolve. It was designed to bond with its operator on a neural level, enhancing reflexes and allowing for seamless communication. Gary listened intently, his mind racing with possibilities. The tank wasn't just a machine. It was a living weapon capable of extraordinary feats. The implications were staggering. A new threat emerges. Their moment of respite was short-lived. Alarms blared, and the control panel lit up with warning signals. The Nasat were regrouping, and this time they were bringing their most feared warriors, the Shadow Blades. "Captain, we have multiple hostile signatures incoming," Atlas reported. "The Shadow Blades are leading the assault." Gary's blood ran cold. The Shadow Blades were the Nasat's elite, known for their ruthless efficiency and unparalleled combat skills. If they were coming, it meant the Nasat were pulling out all the stops to crush the resistance. "Prepare for battle," Gary shouted to his team. "We need to hold this position at all costs." A desperate defense. The Shadow Blades struck with terrifying precision. Their plasma weapons cut through the air, forcing the resistance fighters to take cover. Gary manned the Abrams, its powerful cannon and energy weapons turning the tide of the battle. Despite their superior technology, the Shadow Blades were relentless. They adapted to the tank's tactics, exploiting any weakness they could find. Gary's hands flew over the controls, his mind and body in perfect sync with the Abrams. Each shot was precise, each movement calculated. "Atlas, divert all power to the shields," Gary ordered as a barrage of plasma fire rained down on them. The tank's shields flared, absorbing the impact but straining under the continuous assault. Unlikely allies. As the battle raged, reinforcements arrived. Human civilians, driven by desperation and a fierce desire to reclaim their home, joined the fight. They brought with them makeshift weapons and an unyielding spirit. Among them was Theron, the old man Gary had met earlier. He and his fellow civilians used their intimate knowledge of the terrain to set traps and ambushes, catching the Shadow Blades off guard. "Gary," Theron shouted over the din of battle, "we've set charges along the western approach. Lead them that way." Gary nodded, adjusting the Abrams position. "Atlas, target the western ridge. We need to create a bottleneck." The tank's cannon roared, the explosion sending rocks and debris cascading down the ridge, forcing the Shadow Blades into the trap. As they advanced, the charges detonated, decimating their ranks, turning the tide. With the Shadow Blades reeling from the ambush, the resistance fighters pressed their advantage. The combined firepower of the Abrams and the civilian militia overwhelmed the remaining Nasat forces. The Shadow Blades, once thought invincible, were defeated. As the dust settled, Gary surveyed the battlefield. The victory had come at a great cost, but they had held the line. The ancient tank, with its fusion of old and new technology, had once again proven its worth. Planning the next move. Back at the command center, the resistance leaders gathered to plan their next move. With the Nasset forces weakened, they had an opportunity to strike a decisive blow. Captain Miller, Colonel Briggs said, "We need to take the fight to the Nasset. With the Abrams leading the charge, we can hit their central command and cripple their operations." Gary nodded. "We have the element of surprise. Let's make it count." The resistance fighters, emboldened by their recent victory, prepared for the assault. The ancient Abrams, now a symbol of hope and defiance, stood ready to lead them into battle. A promise. Before they set out, Gary took a moment to address his team. "We've come a long way, and we've faced impossible odds, but we've shown the Nasset that humanity will not be broken. Today, we fight for our future, for our freedom, and for those who can't fight for themselves." The final assault. Into the heart of darkness. With the command center secured and the resistance fighters invigorated, the plan for a final assault on the Nasset's central command took shape. The ancient Abrams tank, a relic-turned beacon of hope, was at the forefront of their strategy. Gary Miller, standing resolute, prepared himself and his team for the most dangerous mission yet. The approach. The resistance moved through the war-torn landscape under the cover of darkness. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. Gary guided the Abrams with a steady hand, its reactive camouflage blending seamlessly with the surroundings. The tank's eye, Atlas, provided constant updates and tactical advice, ensuring they remained one step ahead of the Nasset patrols. "Captain, I detect increased activity near the central command," Atlas reported. "The Nasset are fortifying their defenses." Gary nodded, his resolve unwavering. "We need to hit them fast and hard. They can't be allowed to regroup." The infiltration. The resistance fighters reached the outskirts of the Nasset Central Command. The imposing structure, bristling with weapons and defenses, loomed ahead. Gary and his team gathered for a final briefing. "Theron, you and your scouts will create a diversion to draw their attention," Gary instructed. "The rest of us will follow the Abrams and punch through their defenses. Once inside, we split into two teams, one to disable their communications and the other to take out their leadership." Theron's eyes gleamed with determination. "We'll give you the opening you need, Captain. Just make sure you finish the job." The battle begins. As Theron's scouts initiated the diversion, explosions rocked the Nasset defenses. Plasma fire lit up the night as the Nasset scrambled to respond to the unexpected attack. Using the chaos to their advantage, Gary and his team advanced with the Abrams leading the way. The tank's cannon roared, blasting through fortified barriers and clearing a path. Nasset soldiers, caught off guard, fell in droves as the resistance fighters poured through the breach. The Abrams energy weapons cut through enemy lines with surgical precision, ensuring minimal casualties among the human forces. Inside the command center. Once inside the Nasset command center, the resistance fighters split into their designated teams. Gary led the charge towards the communications hub, determined to sever the Nasset's ability to coordinate their forces. "Atlas, give me a layout of the facility," Gary ordered as they moved through the labyrinthine corridors. Holographic displays projected the interior of the command center. "Captain, the communications hub is 2 levels below. Expect heavy resistance." Gary's team pressed forward, encountering fierce opposition at every turn. The Nasset defenders, realizing the gravity of the situation, fought with desperate ferocity. Plasma bolts and energy blasts filled the air as the resistance fighters engaged in brutal close-quarters combat. Disabling communications. Reaching the communications hub, Gary and his team set charges on critical systems. As the countdown began, a squad of elite Nasset soldiers, led by a towering commander, burst into the room. The ensuing battle was intense and chaotic, with Gary and his team fighting for every inch of ground. "Hold them off," Gary shouted, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. "We need those charges to detonate." With seconds to spare, the charges exploded, plunging the command center into darkness. The Nasset's communications were crippled, leaving their forces disorganized and vulnerable. The showdown. Meanwhile, the second team, led by Sergeant Jackson, stormed the command center's core. There, they confronted General Zephyr, the mastermind behind the Nasset occupation of Zephyr. The general, a fearsome figure augmented with cybernetic enhancements, stood ready to defend his stronghold. "Human scum," Zephyr hissed, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can defeat me? I am the might of the Nasset Empire." Jackson and his team engaged Zephyr in a deadly duel, their weapons clashing with the general's formidable defenses. Despite his overwhelming strength, Zephyr struggled against the combined might and determination of the resistance fighters. Victory at a cost. Back in the communications hub, Gary and his team regrouped, their bodies battered but spirits unbroken. The sounds of battle echoed through the corridors as they made their way to the core, determined to join Jackson's team. When they arrived, they found Jackson and his fighters locked in combat with Zephyr. With a roar of defiance, Gary joined the fray, his blade flashing as he fought alongside his comrades. The battle was fierce, but the tide turned in the resistance's favor. Gary's strike found its mark, piercing Zephyr's defenses and dealing a fatal blow. The Nasset general fell, his cybernetic eyes flickering as he breathed his last. A new dawn. With Zephyr's death, the remaining Nasset forces crumbled. The resistance fighters, bloodied but victorious, stood triumphant in the heart of the enemy's stronghold. The ancient Abrams tank, symbol of human resilience and ingenuity, had led them to victory. As dawn broke over the war-ravaged landscape, the resistance fighters began to secure the command center. Gary, standing amid the ruins of their victory, knew that the fight was far from over. But for the first time in years, they had hope. "We did it," Jackson said, his voice filled with awe and exhaustion. "We actually did it." Gary nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This is just the beginning. With the Abrams and our united strength, we'll take back Zephyr and drive the Nasset from our world." A legacy of hope. The victory at the command center marked a turning point in the war. News of the triumph spread like wildfire, inspiring resistance movements across the galaxy. The legend of the ancient Abrams tank and the heroes who fought alongside it became a beacon of hope for all who yearned for freedom. Gary, Jackson, Theron, and the other resistance fighters continued their struggle, each battle bringing them closer to ultimate victory. The memory of those who had fallen and the legacy of the Abrams guided them forward. And so the fight for Zephyr continued, fueled by the unbreakable spirit of humanity and the indomitable will to reclaim their world. Rebuilding and retribution. Consolidating gains. With the command center secured and the Nasset forces in disarray, the resistance fighters began the arduous task of consolidating their gains. The ancient Abrams tank, now a symbol of human resilience, stood sentinel as engineers and soldiers worked to fortify their position. Gary Miller, exhausted but determined, met with Colonel Briggs and the other leaders to plan their next moves. The victory had given them a foothold, but the road ahead was fraught with danger. A new challenge. "Captain Miller," Colonel Briggs began, her voice filled with both pride and concern. "We've done the impossible, but we can't afford to rest. The Nasset will regroup, and their retaliation will be swift and brutal." Gary nodded. "We need to strike while the iron is hot. If we can disrupt their supply lines and weaken their hold on Zephyr, we'll have a chance to turn the tide for good." Briggs agreed. "Our intelligence suggests that the Nasset have a major supply depot north of here. If we can take it out, we'll cripple their ability to reinforce and resupply their troops." Preparing for the assault. The resistance fighters began preparing for the assault on the supply depot. Engineers worked tirelessly to repair and upgrade the Abrams, ensuring it was in peak condition for the upcoming battle. The tank's advanced weaponry and reactive camouflage would be crucial in their efforts. Gary's squad, now seasoned veterans of countless skirmishes, gathered for a final briefing. Each member was acutely aware of the stakes. Failure was not an option. The journey north. Under the cover of darkness, the resistance fighters moved north, their progress marked by the faint glow of their equipment. The terrain was treacherous, but they navigated it with practiced ease. Gary led the way, his instincts honed by years of combat. As they approached the supply depot, the tension was palpable. The Nasset, though weakened, were still a formidable foe. The depot was heavily guarded, and the resistance fighters knew that any misstep could spell disaster. The assault begins. At the break of dawn, the resistance launched their assault. The Abrams led the charge, its cannon roaring as it blasted through the depot's outer defenses. The Nasset soldiers, caught off guard, scrambled to mount a defense. Plasma fire and explosions filled the air as the resistance fighters engaged the Nasset in fierce combat. The Abrams energy weapons cut through enemy lines with surgical precision, paving the way for the infantry to advance. Gary, at the helm of the tank, coordinated the attack with calm efficiency. Atlas, target their heavy artillery. We need to neutralize it before they can counterattack. Affirmative, Captain. The AI responded. The tank's main gun swiveled, firing a devastating shot that obliterated the Nasset's artillery emplacement. Victory and vengeance. The battle raged for hours, but the resistance fighters' determination and superior tactics won the day. As the sun set over the smoldering ruins of the depot, Gary and his squad surveyed the aftermath. The Nasset's supply lines were in shambles, and their ability to wage war was severely crippled. "This is a major blow to the Nasset," Colonel Briggs said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "We've given ourselves a fighting chance." Gary nodded, though his mind was already on the next objective. "We need to keep up the pressure. The Nasset won't rest, and neither can we." A personal mission. As the resistance fighters regrouped and tended to their wounded, Gary received a transmission from an unexpected source. A voice from his past, one he hadn't heard in years. "Captain Miller, it's been a long time." Gary's eyes widened in shock. "Jenna, is that really you?" The voice on the other end was filled with emotion. "Yes, Gary. I'm leading a resistance cell on the other side of the planet. We've been fighting the Nasset just like you. We need your help." Gary's heart raced. Jenna was his sister, fought lost to the war. The revelation that she was alive and leading her own fight against the Nasset filled him with both joy and urgency. "I'll be there, Jenna," Gary promised. "Hold on. We're coming." A new hope. With renewed purpose, Gary and his squad prepared for their next mission. The battle for Zephyr was far from over, but the discovery that his sister was alive and fighting gave Gary a new sense of hope. Together, they would continue the fight, driven by the unbreakable bonds of family and the unwavering spirit of humanity. The ancient Abrams tank, a relic of the past, would lead them into the future, a future where freedom was within reach, and the Nasset's reign of terror would come to an end. The battle for unity. Reunion. The journey to reunite with Jenna and her resistance cell was fraught with danger. Gary and his squad navigated treacherous terrain and evaded Nasset patrols, driven by the hope of reuniting with family and strengthening their forces. When they finally reached Jenna's base, the sight of her standing at the entrance, determined and unbowed, brought tears to Gary's eyes. They embraced, the weight of years apart melting away in that moment. Sharing intelligence. Inside the base, Gary and Jenna shared their experiences and intelligence. Jenna's cell had gathered crucial information about Nasset operations and weaknesses, which could be instrumental in their fight. "We've identified several key targets," Jenna explained, pointing to a map. "If we can hit these, we'll severely disrupt their command structure." Gary nodded, absorbing the information. "We'll need to coordinate our attacks. With the Abrams and our combined forces, we can deal a significant blow to the Nasset." Coordinated assault. The resistance fighters from both cells worked together, planning a coordinated assault on multiple Nasset targets. The ancient Abrams tank, now an iconic symbol of hope, would spearhead the attack. As the sun set, they moved out, their resolve steeled by the knowledge that this could be a turning point in the war. The night was filled with tension and anticipation, each fighter aware of the critical nature of their mission. The first strike. The first target was a Nasat command post. The resistance fighters approached under the cover of darkness, the Abrams' reactive camouflage rendering it nearly invisible. When they were within striking distance, Gary gave the order to attack. The tank's cannon roared, shattering the command post's defenses. Resistance fighters poured in, engaging the Nasat soldiers in brutal combat. Plasma fire lit up the night, and the sounds of battle echoed through the air. Gary, at the helm of the Abrams, coordinated the assault with precision. Atlas, target their power generators. We need to cripple their defenses. Understood, Captain, the AI responded. The tank's energy weapons fired, hitting the generators and plunging the command post into chaos. A swift victory. The battle was fierce, but the resistance fighters, bolstered by the Abrams, overwhelmed the Nasat forces. With the command post in ruins, they quickly moved on to the next target, their momentum building with each victory. News of the Resistance's success spread rapidly, inspiring other cells to rise up and join the fight. The coordinated assaults created a ripple effect, weakening the Nasat's grip on Zephyr. A glimmer of hope. As they regrouped, Gary and Jenna stood together, surveying the battlefield. The sight of the fallen Nasat strongholds filled them with a sense of accomplishment and renewed hope. "We're making progress," Jenna said, her voice filled with determination. "But we can't let up now. The Nasat will regroup and retaliate." Gary nodded. "We need to stay one step ahead. With the Abrams and our united forces, we have a chance to end this war." The next phase. With their initial targets secured, the resistance fighters prepared for the next phase of their campaign. They would launch a full-scale assault on the Nasat's central command, aiming to deliver a decisive blow that could break the enemy's hold on Zephyr once and for all. The ancient Abrams tank, a relic turned savior, would lead the charge. Gary, Jenna, and their combined forces stood ready, their resolve unshakable. As they moved out, the weight of their mission pressed down on them, but so did the hope of a brighter future. The fight for Zephyr was far from over, but with each victory, they moved closer to reclaiming their world. The decisive battle. The final push. The resistance fighters, now a formidable force united under the banner of hope, prepared for the final push. Their target was the Nasat's central command, a heavily fortified structure that served as the heart of the enemy's operations on Zephyr. Gary and Jenna, standing side by side, addressed their fighters. "This is it," Gary said, his voice filled with conviction. "We fought long and hard for this moment. Today, we strike a blow for freedom." The fighters responded with a resounding cheer, their spirits lifted by the promise of victory. The ancient Abrams tank, its armor gleaming in the dawn light, stood ready to lead them into battle, breaking the defenses. As the resistance approached the central command, the Nasat forces braced for the attack. The defenders were numerous and well-equipped, but the resistance had something they didn't: the element of surprise and the indomitable spirit of humanity. The Abrams led the charge, its cannon roaring as it blasted through the outer defenses. Resistance fighters followed, engaging the Nasat soldiers in fierce combat. The battle was chaotic, plasma fire and explosions filling the air. "Atlas, focus fire on their heavy artillery," Gary ordered, the tank's AI responding with precision. The Abrams energy weapons cut through the Nasat's defenses, clearing a path for the infantry to advance. Infiltrating the command center, with the outer defenses breached, the resistance fighters stormed the command center. Gary and Jenna led the way, their weapons ready as they moved through the labyrinthine corridors. "We need to take out their command structure," Jenna said, her eyes scanning for threats. "Without their leaders, the Nasat forces will fall into disarray." As they advanced, they encountered heavy resistance. Nasset's soldiers, determined to defend their stronghold, fought with desperate ferocity. The corridors echoed with the sounds of battle, each step a test of endurance and will. The confrontation. Reaching the heart of the command center, Gary and Jenna found themselves face to face with the Nasset High Command. The leaders, flanked by elite guards, stood ready to defend their position. "You humans are relentless," the Nasset commander sneered, his voice filled with contempt. "But your defiance ends here." Gary's response was swift. "Your reign of terror is over. We're taking Zephyr back." The battle that followed was intense and brutal. The resistance fighters, fueled by their desire for freedom, clashed with the Nasset elite. Plasma fire and energy blasts filled the room as the two sides fought for control. Victory. Despite the Nasset's formidable defenses, the resistance fighters pressed on. The ancient Abrams tank, its energy weapons devastating, provided crucial support. One by one, the Nasset leaders fell, their elite guards unable to withstand the onslaught. As the last of the Nasset High Command was defeated, a cheer rose from the resistance fighters. The central command was theirs. The tide of the war had turned. Reclaiming Zephyr. With the Nasset High Command in disarray, the resistance fighters moved quickly to secure the rest of Zephyr. The victory at the central command sparked uprisings across the planet, as civilians and resistance cells joined forces to drive the Nasset from their world. Gary and Jenna, standing amidst the ruins of the command center, looked out over the battlefield. The sight of their fellow fighters, victorious and free, filled them with a profound sense of accomplishment. "We did it," Jenna said, her voice filled with emotion. "We actually did it." Gary nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "This is just the beginning. We've reclaimed Zephyr, but the fight for our freedom continues." A new era. As the resistance fighters celebrated their victory, plans were already being made for the future. The ancient Abrams tank, a symbol of their triumph, would be restored and preserved as a testament to their struggle. Gary, Jenna, and the other resistance leaders worked tirelessly to rebuild their world. The war had taken a heavy toll, but the spirit of humanity remained unbroken. Together, they would create a future where freedom and peace reigned. The story of the ancient Abrams tank and the heroes who fought alongside it would be passed down through generations. It was a legacy of courage, sacrifice, and the unyielding will to reclaim their world. As the sun set over the liberated landscape of Zephyr, Gary and Jenna stood side by side, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. For they knew that as long as they stood together, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. A legacy of hope, building a new world. With the Nasset forces defeated and Zephyr reclaimed, the resistance fighters turned their attention to rebuilding their world. The war had left deep scars, but the spirit of humanity was resilient. Under the leadership of Gary, Jenna, and the other resistance leaders, the people of Zephyr began the long process of recovery. The ancient Abrams tank, now a symbol of their victory, was restored and displayed in the heart of the rebuilt capital. It stood as a testament to their struggle and a reminder of the courage and sacrifice that had led them to this moment. A united front. The victory on Zephyr had far-reaching effects. Other colonies, inspired by the Resistance's success, rose up against their oppressors. The flames of rebellion spread across the galaxy, united under the banner of freedom. Gary and Jenna, along with their fellow resistance leaders, worked to forge alliances with these newly liberated worlds. Together, they formed a coalition dedicated to ensuring that no world would ever again suffer under the tyranny of the Nasset or any other oppressor. Remembering the fallen. As they rebuilt, the people of Zephyr honored those who had given their lives for the cause. Memorials were erected, and stories were told of the bravery and sacrifice of the resistance fighters. Among these stories, the legend of Gary Miller and the ancient Abrams tank became a symbol of hope and determination. Gary, often finding himself reflecting on the past, would visit the tank, now a revered relic. He would remember the battles fought, the friends lost, and the victory won. It was a reminder of the cost of freedom and the unyielding spirit that had made it possible. A new generation. As the years passed, a new generation grew up in the shadow of these legends. They were taught the history of the resistance, the story of the ancient Abrams tank, and the heroes who had reclaimed their world. These stories inspired them to continue the fight for justice and to protect the freedoms their forebears had won. Gary, Jenna, and the other leaders took on the role of mentors, guiding the new generation and passing on the values and lessons learned from their struggle. They knew that the fight for freedom was never truly over, and they were determined to ensure that future generations would be prepared to defend it. A future of peace, with the Nasset threat vanquished and the galaxy united under a banner of freedom. A new era of peace and prosperity began. The coalition of liberated worlds worked together to rebuild and advance, creating a future where all could live free from fear and oppression. Gary, now a revered elder statesman, continued to lead with wisdom and humility. His legacy, and that of the ancient Abrams tank, was secure. It was a legacy of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of humanity. As he looked out over the thriving cities and peaceful landscapes of Zephyr, Gary knew that they had achieved something extraordinary. They had turned the tide of war, reclaimed their world, and built a future where freedom and peace reigned.